It was dawn on a day of celebration. The people of Aegea pressed into the theatre. But as Philip entered, he was struck down. His murderer was killed as he fled to his horses.
Something we know is that after the death of Philip, Alexander was proclaimed, probably here in this theater, King of Macedon. So from here starts the period of Hellenistic civilization, let us say, the expedition of Alexander, something which changed the world, we can say.
Alexander's reign began with bloody retribution. There was little solid evidence to implicate the dead assassin in a plot, but there were enough disaffected factions to attempt such a murder. Whether it was planned or not, the killer's sons were put to death, and Alexander executed 2 others he suspected of involvement. These unfortunates were thrown onto the funeral pyre alongside Philip and his regalia. As was the custom, the charred mud bricks from the base of the pyre were placed on top of the newly built tomb. A second chamber was added to the tomb after Philip's burial, revealed by this join in the plasterwork. Had it been built to receive another victim of Macedon's violent politics? When Andronicus entered it, he found even more riches. Inside were the remains of a woman's jewellery, like this gold-plated pectoral. There was more weaponry and armour. And lying among the decomposing remains on the floor, this crown of myrtle flowers. Inside the sarcophagus, he found a second golden larnax. It contained more bones, which were wrapped in a cloth of gold. And finally, there was another magnificent golden crown. The identification of the bones from this larnax presented Jonathan Musgrave with a difficult challenge, since they were so fragmented. The first priority was to prove conclusively the sex and age of the bones. He could then try to relate this information to the historical data about the characters involved in the political intrigues.
When one's trying to establish the sex of any skeleton, one uses a few diagnostic, or as many diagnostic pieces as one can. Among the limb bones, for example, we have both right and both left femoral heads, and the size of those does differ quite significantly between the sexes, and those, of course, fall into the female range, and we have other bones like the head of the humerus and so on. We're talking about a young woman in her early to mid-20s. The most likely is Cleopatra, who was Philip's last wife, who was murdered early in 335, 6 months after Philip's death, along with her baby. She was probably about 22 when she died, so she would be quite a strong candidate indeed. There is obviously the problem of the absence of baby bones, but that is not insuperable. She died under certainly hostile and tragic conditions, and her murderers or her enemies could very easily have, separated mother and child in death through vindictiveness.
To investigate the roots of the society which gave birth to Philip and Alexander, Andronicus extended his excavations to the plain on which the city and its cemetery sprawled for centuries. In the 1980s, one of Andronicus's assistants, Dr. Chrysula Pagliadelli, undertook the huge task of uncovering the houses, streets and public centres of Aegaea. Despite discovering ruined walls and thousands of potsherds, it was difficult at first to understand the layout of the lost city. Then, in 1982, a temple was uncovered, built of finely cut marble. There were 3 statue bases, on one of which was an inscription saying that Eurydice, Philip's mother, had dedicated the temple to the goddess Euclea. This did more than just demonstrate royal patronage of the religious life of the city. It also told Pagliadelli that the area close to the temple could be the agora, or public heart of the city, if the Macedonians had followed Greek convention. The evidence of these ruined walls now indicates that this was so. The very plan of the city is a sign of how much Aegaea reflected Greek culture a generation before Philip.